Why was she still alive when everyone else was gone? The echoes of gunfire had faded hours ago, leaving only the hollow silence of a mission gone wrong. In the coastal ruins of what should have been a routine reconnaissance patrol had transformed into a massacre. Now, Specialist Dawson crouched behind a rusted shipping container, her chest heaving, her pulse slamming against her ribs as though it wanted out. Her unit, 8 Marines she had lived, laughed, and marched beside, lay scattered in the dirt and broken concrete. The ambush had been precise, devastating, and final. And yet, somehow she was still here. Not because of luck, not really, but because survival had never been something she relied on others to hand her. It was something she carved out of the unforgiving world, inch by inch. She pressed her back against the cold steel of the container, biting down the tremor in her hands. Her rifle, cracked and useless, rested across her lap. Her radio sputtered static, no extraction, no command, no cavalry riding in. Her tactical vest held only scraps, a combat knife, half a canteen of water, a few odds and ends. Against a force this size, it was laughable. And yet she wasn't laughing, she was calculating. Because out there in the distance she could hear them. Voices, calm, confident, at least a dozen of them moving like they belonged here, not chaotic insurgents. No, their rhythm, their spacing, their clipped commands gave them away, professionals. Her jaw tightened as a memory pushed into her mind unbidden. 3 days earlier, briefing at Forward Operating Base Sentinel. Captain Mercer standing tall before the tactical map, voice sharp as he reassured them. Minimal resistance. In and out in 12 hours. Minimal resistance. She almost laughed at the cruel irony. She remembered Sergeant's smirk across the table, his tone dripping with condescension as he muttered, "Dawson, try not to slow us down this time." A few Marines chuckled under their breath. She kept her eyes down, ignored the sting, swallowed the pride. She'd been underestimated before, always. And maybe, just maybe, that was why she was alive now. Because they didn't see her coming. The voices drew closer, boots crunching glass, weapons clinking in the night. One barked an order, search every inch. One survivor, female, find her. Her pulse spiked, they knew. Eyes flicked over the industrial graveyard around her. 50 yards north she spotted it, a warehouse. Abandoned, decaying, but full of shadows, full of possibilities. A labyrinth, a place she could turn from prey into something else entirely. She drew in 3 slow breaths, centering herself. Then she moved. Every step was precise, her body low, her silhouette small. She wove between broken forklifts, rusted crates, slabs of collapsed concrete. Voices rose behind her, but she didn't break. 15 minutes of painstaking movement, freezing whenever a beam of light swept near. Finally, she reached the warehouse wall. A broken window gaped above her. She pulled herself through and landed in a crouch, knees absorbing the shock without sound. Inside, silence. Heavy, dusty silence. Shafts of fatting sunlight cut through jagged glass overhead, illuminating chains hanging from rusted tracks, piles of debris, shadows of forgotten machinery. The air smelled of rust and mildew, of a place time itself had abandoned. She stood still, listening. The chains usable, the broken glass sharp, plentiful. Metal rods, clubs, spears, multiple levels above her, vantage points. Escape routes through cracked doors, maintenance shafts. Her brain worked faster now, sharper, like a storm coiling into lightning. Her hand brushed against her inner forearm where a small tattoo hid beneath her sleeve. A mark few would recognize. A mark tied to training she wasn't supposed to talk about. Survival, evasion, resistance, escape. And she whispered to herself, almost smiling, "All right, let's play." She began to move. The chains became snares, the glass scattered where boots would tread. Metal rods turned into crude weapons. Every scrap became part of a web only she could see forming. Her movements were calm, efficient, almost surgical. This wasn't panic. This was preparation. Footsteps, voices, boots crunching glass outside. She froze, body dissolving into the shadows of an upper catwalk, breath shallow, eyes sharp. The first two entered, rifles sweeping, movements disciplined but separated. A tactical mistake. The first moved left, the second right. Strap waited. The second man's boot caught her wire, snap. A chain whipped tight around his ankle, yanking him upward with a strangled cry. He dangled, thrashing, disoriented. Before his partner could even register, descended from the catwalk like a ghost. Her knife flashed. His weapon slipped from his hands, now hers. And before the first hostile could whirl and fire, she was gone, swallowed back into the dark. "Contact East Corner," the man shouted, firing bursts into shadows. But there was nothing there, just silence, just fear. "She's hunting us," the captured man croaked, still swinging upside down. "This isn't panic, she's hunting us back." And in the shadows, allowed herself the smallest smile. Because fear was a weapon too. The rest would come soon, she knew it, more boots, more voices. She could already hear the leader barking orders. But Dawson wasn't going to die in that warehouse. Not like prey, not like the liability they thought she was. She would show them what it meant to underestimate someone who had lived her entire life, underestimated. What it meant to face someone who thought sharper under pressure. What it meant to corner a woman they thought was easy prey. Because she would make them regret it. Why hadn't they stormed her all at once? That question lingered as crouched on the catwalk, watching the first team retreat, dragging their shaken comrade back toward the doors. Fear had done its work. They weren't charging anymore. They were recalculating, and that meant she had time. Time to prepare. Time to turn this warehouse into something it had never been before. Her hands worked fast, a chain secured to a support beam, glass shards scattered where shadows pooled, Ken strung with wire to create alarms. She moved like she was born in shadows, silent, efficient, focused. Every corner became a trap, every scrap of metal a chance to tilt the odds. Her body ached, the cut on her forehead, the bruises on her shoulder, but she ignored it. She had been here before in different forms in different places. Alone, discounted, fighting to prove that her being here was not a mistake. The memory rose again unbidden. Crucible training, the final test before earning the title Marine. She remembered dragging herself up that hill with extra weight, muscles screaming, lungs on fire. Others had cursed her, told her to quit. Instead, she had carried not just her own pack but the load of the weakest in her group, stumbling across the finish with the kind of grit instructors couldn't ignore. "Sometimes the field isn't fair," an instructor had said later. "Sometimes you're out of luck. That's when your mind is your sharpest weapon." Her mind was sharp now, razor sharp. The doors creaked open again. More boots, heavier this time. A leader's voice carried, cold and steady. "Sweep every inch. She's one woman with no backup, no more mistakes." They entered with precision. 6 this time, spreading in coordinated pairs, rifles sweeping every angle. They were good. Better than the first. They knew she was prepared now. Melted deeper into the rafters, every breath controlled, every muscle coiled. Her eyes tracked their movements, calculating. 2 moved toward a darkened corner, exactly where she had left her improvised caltrops. Sharp fragments pierced their boots, ripping through soles, cutting flesh. One cried out, stumbling. The other bent to help, exactly when she struck. She dropped from an overhead pipe like lightning, the impact driving air from the first man's chest. Her knife found his throat in silence. A sweep of her leg dropped the second. A sharp strike to the temple, unconscious. 2 down, 4 left. Gunfire erupted elsewhere as the others responded to the commotion, spraying bullets into shadows, but was already gone, sliding back into the catwalks, dragging their radios and weapons with her. "She's setting traps," one hissed into comms. "Move in pairs, watch above, watch the ground." Their leader knelt beside the unconscious men, examining the shards of glass. "This isn't standard Marine training," he muttered, his voice grudgingly respectful. "Check her file again." Lips curved faintly. They were starting to realize. From her new vantage point, she pressed the stolen radio close. Their voices filled her ear, panicked, searching, second-guessing. She listened, memorizing patterns. Information was power, and power was the one thing she could steal from them without firing a shot. She scratched a mark into a concrete pillar below, a small symbol from her tattoo. It wasn't random. It was deliberate. Minutes later, one of them spotted it. "Command," his voice crackled over the net. "We've got a marking here, same as on her arm." Another voice answered, low and tense. "Confirm symbol." "Seer School, advanced class." A silence. Then the leader's voice. "That means she's trained for this. Survival, evasion, resistance, escape, the version, the one they don't talk about." Closed her eyes briefly, feeling the old ache in her chest. Seer wasn't something you forgot. Days of no sleep, no food. Tests that broke some people forever. The instructors stripping away humanity until only one truth remained: survive. Few graduates, fewer still excelled, and even fewer were women. She let them talk, let the realization sink in. Fear was a weapon, but respect was too. Both slowed a man's trigger finger, both made him hesitate. The warehouse grew quiet again as they regrouped, setting new search patterns. Used the lull to check herself. Her cut had stopped bleeding, but her shoulder throbbed. She took a sip of her dwindling water, letting the cool liquid sit in her mouth before swallowing. Every resource mattered. The radio crackled again. "All units maintain perimeter. Additional assets incoming." Her gut clenched. Additional assets. That could mean drones, thermal dogs, or something worse. She repositioned to a broken window, peering out. And then she saw it, rotors cutting the night. A helicopter, black, unmarked, descending beside the warehouse. Her stomach dropped. The side door opened. A man stepped out, tall, confident, tactical gear sharper than the rest. His presence shifted the entire energy of the force. They straightened under him, even their leader snapping to attention. Retreated from the window, her mind racing. This was no longer a simple sweep. Whoever he was, he carried authority and power. Her stolen radio hissed again. "Profile confirmed. Specialist Dawson, Force Recon, Advanced Seer Graduate, Priority Alpha." Her breath caught. They weren't just clearing survivors. They were hunting her, specifically her. The ambush hadn't been chance. It had been the point. She crouched low, every nerve electric, listening as the new man's voice cut through the comms. "She's more valuable alive. Switch to non-lethal. Contain her. No unnecessary harm." Alive, not dead, alive. And suddenly the game changed. Her knife tightened in her grip. If they wanted her breathing, she could use that. Their hesitation was her advantage. But deep inside, beneath the cold calculation, a darker question pulsed. Why her? Why was she valuable enough to kill an entire team for? The answer would have to wait, because footsteps were coming again, boots, voices, a perimeter closing in. And Dawson, the Marine they thought was liability, the one they thought was easy prey, was ready to show them exactly what regret felt like. Why hadn't she broken yet? That thought seemed to hang in the air, not just in her own mind but in theirs. She could hear it in their hesitations, their clipped orders over the radio. She could almost feel it, an unease rippling through the professional cadence of the men sent to capture her. They expected exhaustion by now, panic, collapse. Instead, crouched in the rafters, pulse steady, eyes sharper than ever. Fear had burned itself out hours ago, replaced by something colder, something cleaner. She had stopped reacting, she was hunting. Below, the black-clad leader surveyed the warehouse like it was a chessboard. Operators moved with precision, scanning angles, checking shadows. But wasn't in the shadows anymore. She was above them, listening. The radio she'd stolen crackled with quiet chatter. They thought they were containing her, boxing her in, but their voices betrayed them. Frequencies revealed sectors, gaps in coverage. She remembered something her seer instructor had said once. The battlefield rarely gives you what you want, it gives you what's there. Your job is to make it enough. Enough. That word rooted in her mind as she crept toward the far side of the warehouse. Enough broken glass, enough metal scraps, enough rope, enough wits to stay one step ahead, enough anger to keep moving even when every bruise screamed. The helicopter outside still idled, blades whining in the night, and she knew if they got her into that bird she was gone, off the grid, a ghost story in some classified file. She wouldn't let it happen. Her chance came when two operators split from the group, stationed at a secondary entrance to secure the perimeter. They moved like men who thought their numbers made them safe. Alert, but not alert enough. Slithered through the pipes overhead, every movement controlled. They didn't look up. No one ever looked up. When the timing aligned, one glancing left, the other right, she dropped. Her knife struck the first man's pressure point, his body collapsing before he could even gasp. The second spun, eyes wide, but her leg sweep took him off his feet. A brutal strike to the temple ended the fight before it began. Two more down. Quick, silent, efficient. She rifled through their gear, pulse steady. Radios, weapons, grenades, more importantly, non-lethal rounds. Confirmation. They wanted her alive. But why? She dragged their limp bodies to a storage closet, binding them with their own zip ties, shoving them inside. They would be found eventually, but not before confusion spread. Already the radio in her hand crackled. Team 3, report, silence. Team 4, status, more silence. Panic sharpened in the leader's voice. All remaining units converge west sector, missing personnel. Smiled grimly. They were dancing to her tune now. And that meant it was time to strike where it mattered most. She slipped across the catwalks toward the command post near the main entrance. She'd seen them sketch maps, monitor intel there. If she could get in, if she could see why they wanted her, maybe she'd finally get answers. Her hands worked fast, assembling a simple diversion. A from the dead operator's kit, rigged with a timer from her watch. She placed it across the warehouse, set to pop in 2 minutes, just enough time to move into position. When the grenade detonated, the entire warehouse flared with blinding light and thunderous noise. Men shouted, scrambled, fired into the dark. Descended behind the lone guard at the command post. A precise strike dropped him before he could even raise his radio. She crouched low, sliding into the chair, eyes snapping to the laptop glowing on the table. Unlocked. Her breath caught. On the screen, email fragments, mission reports, her name, Asset Dawson, Specialist Retrieval, Priority Alpha. Her pulse pounded as she scrolled. A project name repeated again and again, Siren. And there her personnel file, except not the version she'd ever seen. Pages highlighted, notations in margins, words that made her skin crawl. Exceptional stress adaptation. Cognitive restructuring under duress. Unique neurological response profile. These weren't military assessments. They read like lab notes. Snapped quick photos with the small recon camera she still carried. Evidence. Proof. Her hands shook just slightly as she shoved the camera back into her vest. A voice sliced into the silence. Command post compromised. She's here. Her blood froze. They were coming. Melted back into the rafters just as the black-clad leader stormed in, scanning the unconscious guard. He barked into his radio. Subject accessed intelligence. Secure her now. Authorization for controlled force approved. Controlled force, containment. She wasn't imagining it. She wasn't just surviving an ambush. She was the target. And then from outside, the sound she feared most. Rotor blades, closer this time, a helicopter descending into the yard. Darted to a broken window, peering out. The aircraft settled into the dirt, its side door sliding open. A tall figure emerged, different from the rest. Sleek gear, movements precise, like every step was calculated. Authority radiated off him like heat. The leader hurried to greet him. Gestures, urgent voices. Strained to listen, her stolen radio pressed close. Situation report, the newcomer demanded. Subject confirmed inside. Resistance beyond standard Marine training. Show me the symbol. They led him to the pillar with her scratched mark. He studied it. His voice dropped low. Confirm target identity. The reply was instant. Specialist Dawson, Advanced Seer graduate, Priority Alpha. Her blood iced. They hadn't just stumbled into her. This wasn't about recon. This had been about her from the very beginning. Her team, her friends, all of them sacrificed or worse for this. Pressed her forehead against the cold steel beam, heart hammering, breath shallow. For the first time, doubt cut deeper than fear. Why her? What did they know that she did? The radio crackled again. Profile confirmed. Highest marks in SEER program history. Exceptional aptitude in improvised weaponry, escape, resistance. Target more valuable alive. Adjust protocols accordingly. More valuable alive. Her grip tightened on the knife. Alive meant extraction, interrogation, experimentation. She closed her eyes, steadying herself. Panic whispered at the edges, but she pushed it down. Survival wasn't about panic. It was about clarity. She opened her eyes again, sharper than before. If they wanted her alive, they'd have to work for it. And if this was about Project Siren, whatever that was, then she'd drag answers out of their shadows before they dragged her into theirs. The game wasn't about running anymore. It was about taking the fight to them. Dawson, the woman they thought was liability, stood in the rafters of that warehouse and whispered to herself. You came for me, fine, now I'm coming for you. And with that, she began her hunt. What kind of operation used her friends as bait? That question chewed at as she crouched high in the rafters, watching the black helicopter idle outside. The tall figure, the one who carried authority without even speaking, now strode into the warehouse. His presence changed the atmosphere instantly. Operators shifted from tension to precision, like his mere existence straightened their spines. Tracked him silently, every nerve alive. Her stolen radio whispered with clipped exchanges. New command on site, awaiting directives. The man stopped near the center of the warehouse floor, lifting a handheld microphone to his lips. His voice boomed through the crackling external speakers. Calm, authoritative. Specialist Dawson, this is Major Raven. Perhaps you remember me. Her chest tightened. The name cut deep. Raven, she knew it. She knew him. One of her instructors during advanced seer training. The hardest, the sharpest, the one who had pushed her until her body broke but her mind sharpened into something unyielding. She froze. This isn't what you think, Raven's voice continued, steady, measured. This is not an enemy ambush. It's an evaluation. The final phase of your assessment for Project Siren. Your team is safe. Extracted before the scenario began. Her pulse slammed against her ribs. Her team alive. Was that possible or just a trick? Her training screamed at her, don't trust it. Psychological manipulation was a core component of SEER. Lies designed to break you. But then he said something that cracked her defenses. Third day of advanced training, Raven said, his tone almost conversational. You improvised a distraction with your canteen, reflecting sunlight into a sentry's eyes. No one else saw it. You and I spoke about it privately afterward. I wrote it in your file as light manipulation for signaling. Her blood went cold. That detail wasn't in any record. It had been between them. Him watching her with those hawk eyes, nodding slightly at her ingenuity. If he knew that, either he was Raven or someone had access to every private corner of her life. You have 30 seconds to acknowledge before extraction, his voice carried even. "This was designed to test your improvisation under extreme duress. You've exceeded expectations, as usual." Gritted her teeth. If this was real, if this was a test, then revealing herself ended it. But if this was a con layered with truth. She decided to probe. She lifted her stolen radio, voice low. "Verification. Exercise fallen eagle. Secondary objective." A pause. Then Raven's voice came back, this time through the same radio frequency, not the loudspeakers. "To evaluate psychological resilience under hopeless conditions. You were the only candidate who realized extraction wasn't the true objective." Her lips parted slightly. He was right, dead right. And that meant, at least part of what he said was true. Her body shifted out of shadow, slowly, deliberately. She stepped onto the catwalk rail, letting herself be seen. Down below, Raven's eyes locked on her. Gray, cold, the same eyes that had assessed her years ago, calculating every strength and flaw. "Impressive work," he called. "Especially the command post infiltration. That wasn't in the plan, you adapted." She didn't lower her guard. Her hand stayed near her sidearm. "What is Project Siren?" she demanded. "A specialized program," Raven replied. "Focused on operators who think differently under stress, who see options where others see dead ends. You're one of them, and you've just proven why." Her muscles trembled, not from fatigue but from the weight of it. None of this had been random. Not the ambush, not the traps, not the voices in the dark. All of it designed. And yet, before she could process the revelation, before she could decide whether to believe him, the warehouse lights cut out. Total blackness. For a beat, silence. Then shouts, movement, gunfire outside. A radio blared, panicked. "Major Raven, facility compromised. Hostiles breaching north perimeter. This is not part of the exercise." The words slammed into harder than any blow. Not part of the exercise. Her stolen radio erupted again. Broken arrow, outer defenses neutralized. 2 platoons strength vehicle support, advancing now. Raven's composure didn't waver, but his voice hardened crisp. "Acknowledged, protocol obsidian. All units reposition. Specialist Dawson." His gaze lifted toward her, steady even in the strobing flash of floodlights outside. "Your evaluation just became real. Improvisation time again." Adrenaline surged like fire through her veins. The test had ended. Reality had arrived. Vaulted down from the catwalk, landing in a crouch. Every instinct screamed to run, to vanish into the chaos, but she forced herself forward toward Raven, toward the truth. Operators around him forming a perimeter. The rattle of automatic fire echoed from outside, distant but closing. Whoever was coming, this wasn't insurgents. This was organized, heavy. "Situation brief," demanded as she fell in step beside Raven. Her voice steady, though her body still thrummed with disbelief. "Unknown force, 2 platoons, vehicle support, intent capture." Raven's eyes flicked toward her. "Not kill, capture, same objective as ours. Only their outcome ends very differently." Her throat tightened, so it was true. She wasn't just an asset to them, she was the asset. "What's the play?" she asked. "Secondary extraction. Southeast, 2 clicks, but we'll never make it without distraction." He scanned the warehouse sharp as ever. "Environmental advantage, you've already mapped it." His mind spun, everything she'd memorized in her hours of evasion. Storage areas, chemical drums, solvents, industrial cleaners. She saw it all now not as junk but as opportunity. "Southwest corner," she said quickly. "Chemical storage, I can make a diversion, big one." Raven nodded once, approving. "Lead us." Gunfire cracked closer. Boots thundered in the halls. Shadows moved across the walls as unknown operators breached the outer structure. Sprinted Raven and 2 others on her heels. They reached the chain-link cage where chemical containers sat forgotten on rusted shelves. She scanned labels: bleach, ammonia, aluminum powder. Perfect. Give me 90 seconds, she hissed. Her hands worked fast, combining mixtures in scavenged canisters, rigging timers from spare components in her vest. Improvised science. Improvised war. Her heart raced, but her mind was calm, crystal clear. This was her environment now, her battlefield. Behind her, Raven's team formed a perimeter. The thunder of boots grew louder, closer. Voices barked orders. Ready, whispered, finishing the last connection. 30 seconds after trigger, we'll have smoke. 60 seconds of heavy cover. Raven nodded. Good work, now move. They pulled back toward the southeast exit. As they did, pressed the remote detonator. Seconds later, the warehouse roared with muffled explosions. White smoke poured, thick and choking, filling hallways, curling into the rafters. Shadows twisted in the chaos. The hostiles coughed, shouted, stumbled. The ruse had worked. Go, Raven ordered. They sprinted through the choking haze, weapons ready. Lungs burned, her body screaming from fatigue, but she didn't slow. Every step mattered. Behind them, the enemy swarmed the warehouse. Their movements weren't chaotic, they were professional, disciplined, and numerous, too many. But Dawson wasn't thinking about the odds anymore. She was thinking about survival, about adaptation, about proving once and for all that she was more than prey. And as gunfire crackled through the smoke, her mind sharpened again into something like steel. Why did it feel like running straight into the unknown was safer than staying still? Boots hammered the concrete as she and Raven's detail slipped through the southeast exit, smoke curling behind them like a phantom. The warehouse trembled with gunfire and the muffled thuds of grenades. The air reeked of chemicals, gunpowder, and fear. But there was no time for fear. They burst into the night, lungs dragging in cool air. For a second the stars stretched above them, wide, endless, indifferent. Then the night cracked with sniper fire. The first round pinged off the steel frame inches from his head. The second tore into one of Raven's men, dropping him instantly. No scream, just a dull thud as his body collapsed into the dirt. Contact ridge line, Raven barked, dragging her behind a rusted tractor for cover. His voice was sharp, not rattled. Controlled chaos, the kind she remembered from Seer. His breath hitched, but her hands were steady. She peeked around the frame. Muzzle flashes flared in the tree line 300 meters out. Professional spacing, elevated positions. They're shepherding us, she muttered, half to herself. Raven glanced at her, eyes sharp. Explain. They're not pinning us down, they're funneling us. Drive us east, away from the ridge, toward low ground. Raven's gaze didn't waver. He almost looked proud. Good, then we won't go east. The next burst of fire shredded the dirt near their feet. Ears rang. Her pulse throbbed. But in the chaos she noticed something. One muzzle flash lingered longer, like a beacon, a spotter. Her instincts kicked in. She dropped to her belly, steadied the stolen rifle against the tractor's axle, and exhaled slow. Light manipulation, angles, shadows. She remembered that old conversation with Raven, how he'd told her, "Your strength isn't brute force, Dawson. It's how you see the world differently." She saw it now, the line of sight, the gap in their formation, the shadow where the spotter crouched. She squeezed. The rifle cracked, the flash winked out, and suddenly the sniper fire stuttered off rhythm, confused. "One down," she said flatly, rolling back into cover. Her tone surprised even her. It was calm, too calm. Raven's mouth twitched into the faintest smile. "Remind me never to underestimate you again." The surviving operators moved under covering fire, dragging the fallen man's gear. They regrouped fast, efficient, but thinner now. 7 left, including Raven and... "Extraction point?" one asked. "South Ridge," Raven replied, "but we'll draw heat all the way there." Looked toward the tree line. The forest stretched black and endless, a wall of shadows, but shadows she could use. "We go through," she said firmly. "Cover in the trees, they'll expect us to stick to low ground." For a heartbeat no one moved, then Raven nodded. "You heard her move." They broke from cover, sprinting across the open stretch toward the trees. Rounds cracked past them, dirt kicking at their heels. Lungs seared, her muscles screamed, but she didn't stop. The forest loomed closer, closer until... Cover! Branches swallowed them, the night thicker, quieter. Muzzle flashes still sparked behind, but now the trees disrupted the angles. They moved in a staggered column, weaving between trunks, boots muffled on damp soil. Senses flared, every twig snap, every breath, every shift of shadow. 2 minutes, Raven murmured, checking his compass. "We hit the creek bed, then follow south." Nodded, but her gut churned. This wasn't over. The silence wasn't safety. It was the pause before the next strike. And then it came. A metallic click. Down, hissed, dragging Raven with her. The explosion ripped the forest apart. A mine. Shrapnel tore bark from trees, showering them with splinters. One operator screamed, clutching his leg. "Ambush," another shouted. Voices erupted all around them, shouting in a language didn't recognize. Figures moved in the dark, coordinated, pressing in. Flashlights darted between the trees. She fired blind toward the muzzle flashes, driving them back. Adrenaline surged, sharpening her vision, slowing time. But even as she fought, her mind chewed on the same question: why capture her? She wasn't the strongest, not the fastest, not the most lethal, but she was here, alive, improvising while trained men around her fell. Was that it, the difference? The firefight crackled hot, close range. Raven barked orders, shifting their defense. Dragged the wounded operator into cover, teeth gritted. He groaned, pale, blood seeping between his fingers. Her hands pressed against his wound. Not gently, but firmly, with the kind of brutal care soldiers learn. "Stay with me," she ordered. Her voice cracked, not with panic, but with something heavier. She couldn't lose another one, not after her team. The man's eyes fluttered. Chest clenched, but she forced herself to keep pressure, to keep him tethered to the world, even as chaos roared around them. "Dawson," Raven's voice cut through. "Move now." She looked up, smoke, muzzle flashes, shadowed figures pressing closer. They couldn't hold this position. Her mind sparked again. Options, angles, possibilities. A fallen tree across the creek bed. Broken branches dry enough to catch. She grabbed a flare from her vest, snapped it to life, and hurled it into the brush. Flames licked fast, greedy, devouring dry timber. Smoke billowed. Confusion spread through the hostiles as the fire roared between them. "Go," she shouted. They moved, dragging the wounded man, weaving through the smoke and fire. The forest behind them lit in flickering orange, swallowing the shouts of the enemy. When they finally stumbled into the shallow creek, collapsed to her knees, chest heaving. Her arms burned from hauling the wounded, her throat raw from smoke. But they were alive. For now. Raven crouched beside her, eyes scanning the darkness. "You kept your head again." Swallowed hard, sweat streaking her dirt-caked face. "They're not stopping, you know that." "No," Raven admitted, his tone flat. "They're not." For a long moment they crouched there in the cold water, listening to the forest burn behind them. The wounded man moaned softly, still alive but fatting. His hands shook, not from fear but from the weight pressing in. Questions with no answers, the guilt of her dead team, the gnawing truth that she was the reason all of this was happening. And yet beneath it all, a harder truth pulsed. They thought she was prey. But prey didn't light forests on fire to survive. She lifted her eyes to the black stretch of creek ahead, one step at a time, one fight at a time, one unanswered question at a time. And she whispered into the night, more to herself than anyone else. "I'm not done yet." Why was Raven watching her more than the enemy? That thought dug into his chest as they moved deeper along the creek bed, water splashing softly around their boots. The night pressed heavy, the air thick with smoke drifting from the fire she had lit. Every branch creak, every distant snap of a twig made her muscles coil. The 7 of them had become 5, 2 gone in the last assault, one limping badly, blood seeping through hastily wrapped bandages. They looked like soldiers stripped down to raw survival, mud-smeared, breath ragged, weapons low. But Raven looked the same, controlled, calculated, his gray eyes never wavering even now. Studied him when he wasn't looking. He didn't move like a man surprised by chaos. He moved like someone adjusting to variables in an equation. And his eyes kept sliding toward her. She wanted to snap at him, demand answers, but survival screamed louder. The creek curved, the current tugging at her legs, the canopy above blotting out the stars. They were buried in shadow now. Finally, they broke into a clearing where the creek widened into a shallow pool. The team dropped, gasping, some sinking into the mud just to take the weight off their legs. Crouched beside the wounded man, checking his pulse. Weak, but still there. Her throat tightened. She didn't even know his name. Not really. Faces blurred when you weren't supposed to trust anyone. She pressed harder on his bandage. Stay with me. For a moment she saw her old squad again, with his smirk, Carter with his endless jokes, humming under his breath to keep fear away. Were they alive like Raven had claimed, or was that just another manipulation? The ache hollowed her chest. She swallowed it down. "You're improvising well," Raven said suddenly, his voice quiet but deliberate. He crouched across from her, face unreadable. Better than the models predicted. Her head snapped up. Models. His jaw tightened. A slip. He looked away, scanning the tree line. His pulse spiked. You knew this was coming. It wasn't a question. Raven didn't answer. One of the operators, face drawn and pale, muttered bitterly, "We're fighting ghosts with numbers we can't match, and you two are playing riddles." Ignored him. Her eyes stayed locked on Raven. "Who are they?" she demanded. Raven's silence was its own answer. But then, movement in the trees. "Contact," someone hissed. Figures appeared at the edge of the clearing. Not ragged insurgents, not local fighters. These men moved like shadows, their gear advanced, their weapons gleaming. Night vision lenses glowed faint green. Their formation was too clean, too professional. His blood went cold. They're military. Not just military, Western Tier 1 tactics. The firefight erupted instantly. Gunfire shredded the silence, sparks snapping off rocks, dove flat, dragging the wounded man under cover. Bullets cracked overhead, the sound sharp, surgical. "Suppress," Raven barked, returning fire with icy precision. His operators followed, but their numbers were thin, their fire weaker. His brain raced. Whoever these men were, they weren't here to train her. They weren't playing, they were here to take her. The thought clawed at her ribs. Why would Allied forces target her? What did Project Siren mean to them? A flash lit the trees. Grenade. Yanked the wounded man further into the creek bed just as the blast tore through the clearing. Shrapnel hissed into water. One operator screamed, his leg torn open. Another dropped his rifle, blood gushing from his arm. They were unraveling fast. His lungs burned as she crawled through mud, dragging the wounded soldier beside her. She felt the weight of every ounce of blood on her hands. She wasn't supposed to be carrying them, wasn't supposed to be the one keeping them tethered. She was the asset, the target. And yet, when she looked at Raven, he was watching her again. Even as bullets raked the clearing, his eyes measured her. Like the firefight was just another test. Fury flared in her chest. She grabbed a smoke grenade from the downed soldier's vest, yanked the pin, and hurled it toward the tree line. Thick clouds billowed, choking the line of sight. "Move," she shouted, her voice cutting sharper than she expected. "East side, low ground." They listened. Without hesitation, they listened, Raven included. The group surged into the smoke, dragging wounded, stumbling through the haze. Muzzle flashes still flared, but the curtain of gray gave them cover. They emerged into deeper forest, branches clawing at their faces, lungs heaving. For a few precious seconds, silence held. They dropped into cover behind a fallen log, gasping. One of the operators cursed, clutching his shredded arm. Another just stared at, eyes wide. "You led that," he said, almost disbelieving. She ignored him, wiping mud from her eyes. Her heart thundered, but her voice came out steady. "They're not here for all of us, just me." No one argued. The silence said everything. Finally, Raven spoke, low, deliberate. "You're right." Her stomach sank. "They're NATO," Raven continued. His tone was cold, factual. "A rogue cell, not sanctioned, but trained, equipped, paid to retrieve you." His vision blurred at the edges. Her own allies, her own world hunting her. "Why?" Her voice cracked raw. "Why me?" Raven's eyes met hers. Hard, heavy. "Because of what you survived, because your brain adapts under pressure in ways theirs don't. You think differently. They want it, to replicate it, to weaponize it." Her chest constricted. She wanted to deny it, to call it madness. But deep down she knew. She had always been different. She had always endured what others couldn't. And now it was a curse. Her hands trembled, but not from fear, from rage. The man beside her coughed, blood streaking his chin, pressed down on his wound again, holding him there. "You're not dying tonight," she whispered fiercely. "Not if I have to drag you." Raven watched her for a long moment, his gaze unreadable. Then, finally, he said quietly, "This is why Siren exists, and this is why they'll never stop." His throat ached, but her eyes burned with a fire she hadn't felt before. "They'll regret it," she whispered, "every single one of them." And in the darkness of that forest, with blood on her hands and ghosts in her head, Dawson stopped being a target. She became something else. Why did survival always feel like betrayal? That thought pressed into his chest as she trudged through the forest mud, her legs burning, lungs scraping for air. Behind her, one operator leaned hard on another, his bandaged leg dragging. Another stumbled silently, blood soaking his sleeve. They were falling apart. And yet Raven moved steady, sharp, untouched by exhaustion. His eyes scanned, his voice calm as ever, directing them forward. But felt his gaze flicker back to her, again and again, like she wasn't just part of this escape but its center. The forest was no longer silent. Far behind them, faint shouts echoed. Lights flickered through trees. The enemy wasn't guessing anymore. They were closing. His chest tightened. Every step forward felt like carrying more than her own weight. She could almost hear the voices of her old team again, mocking, laughing, Carter humming. Were they alive, like Raven had said, or had they been fed into this fire same as the rest? Her throat ached with guilt. She should been with them, should gone down with them. Instead, she was dragging strangers through a forest, hunted by ghosts in her own uniform. And all of it because of her. They narrowed into a rocky incline, forcing them upward. Boots slipped, scraping against stone. Hauled the wounded man's arm over her shoulders, his weight driving fire into her muscles. "Leave me," he croaked, voice faint. "You won't make it with me slowing." "Shut up," hissed, dragging him higher, her teeth clenched. "We're not leaving anyone." Raven's voice drifted from above them. "She's right, nobody gets left, not in my command." Bit back a bitter laugh. Command. That word rang hollow here, with half their number dead and the rest bleeding into the dirt. They crested the incline and dropped into a hollow. Trees curled around them like prison bars. For a moment, silence returned. The wounded man collapsed, groaning, his head lolling. Pressed down on his bandages again, her hands sticky with blood. Her heart thudded. She wasn't trained as a medic, just enough to keep a body alive long enough for help to come. But there was no help coming. Her eyes burned, she pressed harder. "Stay with me," she whispered, "stay." Raven crouched beside her, his voice low. "You can't save him all the way, you know that." Her head snapped up, rage boiling. Then I'll hold him together until I can, until I have nothing left. For the first time, Raven didn't answer. His gray eyes just lingered on her face, unreadable. Then a distant crack, not thunder, not a branch, a rifle. Her blood froze. More cracks followed, sharp, controlled. Sniper fire again. Bark splintered above their heads, chips raining down. Contact down, Raven barked. The hollow erupted in chaos. Bullets chewed the earth, sparks flashing off rock. They were pinned. Dragged the wounded man behind a tree, pressing low. Her heart slammed. She peeked once, quick, tracing angles. 2 shooters at least, probably more. Her brain sparked, drawing maps in the dirt of her mind. Every tree, every shadow, every gap. The only way out was across 30 yards of open ground. Death zone. They want us stuck, she muttered. Raven heard, he nodded grimly. Options. Her chest heaved. There weren't any good ones. But then her eyes landed on the flare still strapped to her vest. Fire again. Her pulse raced. Fire meant cover. Fire meant chaos. Fire meant chance. But fire also meant risk. The flames could eat them too. Her hands trembled. The choice pressed hard against her ribs. Save them or risk burning them all. She thought of her team again. Of all the times she'd swallowed their mockery, all the moments she'd carried their weight without recognition. And now they were gone. She couldn't save them, but she could save these men. She snapped the flare, fire sparking to life. "What are you doing?" one operator hissed. His jaw clenched, surviving. She hurled it into the brush. Dry timber caught instantly, flames roaring high, smoke choking the air. Shadows twisted. Snipers lost their sight lines. "Move," she shouted. They ran through fire, through smoke. Bullets cracked blind but wide. Felt the heat lick her skin, the smoke claw her lungs. But she pushed forward, dragging the wounded, shoving him when he faltered. The fire raged behind them, consuming the hollow. They stumbled into thicker woods, collapsing behind a downed log, chest heaving, skin blistered, but alive. His body shook, her lungs screaming. She coughed hard, tears stinging her eyes. The wounded man wheezed, his head against her lap. His pulse fluttered weak, fatting. She pressed down again, desperate. "Stay with me, please." His eyes met hers, faint but steady. "You saved us," he rasped. Her throat closed. She wanted to believe him, but she knew the truth. She hadn't saved them all, not her squad, not everyone tonight. And maybe she never would. For the first time since Raven had reappeared, her hands trembled not from rage, not from adrenaline, but from exhaustion, from the hollow ache of being human. She felt her chest cave under the weight of it. The truth that no matter how sharp her mind, how fierce her will, she couldn't save everyone. Raven crouched nearby, watching her. His voice was quiet, almost gentle. "You can't carry them all." Lifted her eyes, wet with smoke and unshed tears. "Then I'll carry the ones I can." And for a long, fragile moment, even Raven had no answer. Why did the forest feel so still, when death was still chasing them? Pressed her back against the charred trunk of a fallen pine, the wounded soldier's weight heavy in her lap. The others crouched nearby, weapons low, eyes scanning the dark. Their breaths came ragged, their bodies broken, but somehow they were still here. Somehow so was she. The night had thinned toward dawn, a pale gray seeping between the trees. Smoke from the fires they'd left behind drifted in lazy ribbons, carrying the sharp sting of ash. The world looked like it had already burned down, and they were just walking through the bones of it. "We can't keep running," one operator whispered. His voice cracked not from fear but from fatigue so deep it sounded hollow. "They'll catch us, sooner or later." Knew he was right. The enemy was methodical, trained, patient. They weren't chasing, they were hunting, hurting. Her mind spun, mapping angles, routes, shadows. Every option ended the same: capture, extraction, disappearance. Unless... Her jaw clenched. Unless she turned the hunt. Raven crouched opposite her, silent. His gray eyes met hers in the faint light. He didn't need to speak. She knew he was waiting for her, for the choice. She hated him for that, hated that somehow this burden wasn't his, it was hers. Her throat tightened as she looked down at the soldier in her lap. His eyes were closed now, his breath shallow. She carried him this far, stitched him together with pressure and willpower, but she could feel him slipping. Her chest ached. She thought of her squad again, Carter's humming. Quiet prayers, smirk. Their voices haunted the spaces between her breaths. She hadn't saved them, she couldn't. But maybe she could make their ghosts mean something. Her hand tightened around her rifle. She whispered almost to herself, "No more running." The others looked at her, startled. Raven's eyes sharpened. "What do you mean?" one asked. Lifted her gaze steady. "They want me, not you. They'll keep coming until they get me, so we stop here." The silence that followed was heavier than gunfire. The wounded soldier stirred weakly, his cracked voice rasping. "Not worth dying for me." Her throat closed, but her voice came firm, sharper than her shaking hands. "We don't get to choose what's worth it. We only get to choose how we go down." Raven finally spoke, quiet, precise. "You're thinking ambush." Meta's gaze. "I'm thinking endgame." And for the first time since this nightmare began, Raven nodded with something like respect. They moved fast, quiet. The brain snapped into overdrive, weaving traps from nothing, tripwires strung between trees, glass shards angled for noise, flares rigged as false signals. They turned the clearing into a maze of death. Every scrap of survival training she'd ever endured came alive in her hands. Every doubt burned into fuel. By the time the first distant voices cut through the trees, she was ready. The forest tensed around them, holding its breath. Then they came. Figures slipped between trunks, night vision lenses glowing, weapons raised. Dozens of them, more than she'd counted. The clearing lit with muzzle flashes, thunder ripping the silence. But was no longer running, she was waiting. The first tripwire snapped, two men yanked off balance, falling into the kill zone. His rifle cracked, dropping one. Raven's fire cut the other. Smoke grenades hissed, spilling gray curtains. Shouts erupted, confusion spreading. Operators stumbled into glass, into wire, into chaos itself. Moved like a ghost, striking then vanishing. Her rifle barked, her knife flashed, her breath came steady. And for the first time, she wasn't prey. She was the storm. But storms don't last forever. A round tore past her shoulder, spinning her into the dirt. Pain seared. She gritted her teeth, rolled behind cover, returned fire. Her vision swam, but she forced her body upright. The enemy pressed harder, numbers overwhelming. One of Raven's men went down, another dragged him into cover. Their line was collapsing. Raven shouted over the chaos, "We can't hold." His chest burned, her mind sparking with the one truth left. She wasn't meant to survive this. She was meant to buy them time. Her hands steadied on the rifle. She looked at Raven, her voice calm, too calm. "Get them out." His eyes widened, the first crack in his stone mask. "Dawson." "Now," she barked, the voice of command she never thought she had. For a beat even Raven froze, then he nodded once, sharp, final. The others began to fall back, dragging the wounded, slipping into the smoke. Raven was last, his eyes locked on hers. "You don't have to." "I do," she cut him off. Her throat ached, but her voice didn't falter. "Sometimes survival isn't about living. It's about making sure someone else does." Raven's jaw tightened, but he didn't argue. He turned, vanishing into the gray with the others. And Dawson, alone now, surrounded, bleeding, rose from the dirt and faced the storm. She moved with precision, every shot deliberate, every step controlled. Bullets cracked past, branches shattered, smoke clawed her lungs. But she didn't stop. She thought of Carter's humming, prayers smirk. She thought of her squad, her brothers, her ghosts. and she smiled, faint blood on her teeth. "Not prey," she whispered. The world exploded around her. They never recovered her body. Some said she went down in that clearing, a final stand that bought the others their escape. Others whispered she vanished into the smoke, too sharp, too stubborn to die. But the men who lived carried her with them. The woman they had mocked, underestimated, doubted, she became something else in their memory. A legend. And in quiet corners of barracks and outposts, when the talk turned to survival and strength, they told her story in low voices. How they thought she was easy prey, and how she made them regret it. Because sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts.